listeners. Welcome to Plano's Political Pitbull podcast. This is Esther, and Ruth is at work today. We are coming to you a bit early than we usually record because we have all this week we're going to be recording our people who are running for Plano City Council. We'll do a question and answer. We will hold off on releasing all of the recordings until they've all been recorded. This way, nobody knows what answers their opponent has given. And today we have our very first candidate, Cary, who is running for place 5. How are you doing today, Cary?
I'm doing wonderful. I'm doing really great.
Good. So, for those who may not know you, tell the listeners a little bit about yourself.
Well, I moved to Plano coming up on almost 15 years ago. And moved here very purposefully. I'm a retailer by trade. I've been involved in running big companies. Here in Dallas, Fort Worth area, I was the president of Sleep Experts, which some people in Plano may know, which I'm pretty proud of. We were voted best places to work by our employees year after year after year. But I've been involved in leading multi-billion-dollar companies with 10,000 plus employees. Once my wife and I moved here, our kids both moved here. My daughter has 3 grandkids she's given to us, and soon a 4th. And we have other family members living here. So Plano is home. We love it here. We love the amenities. We love the safety of the community. We love the job market and the opportunities it provides, the parks. I mean, it's just a great place to be.
Great. What have you done previously with the city? Any work that you've done with the city before?
Yeah, well, I was appointed to the Planning and Zoning Commission by Casey Prince and Anthony Ricciardelli, a little over 4.5 years ago now. And I served as a Planning and Zoning Commissioner for 4 years. The last 2 years, I served as the first vice chair. And that was kind of cool because it gets voted on by the members of the commission. And so I was really honored that they wanted me to sit in that chair. So I've done that. I also was appointed to the bond committee by Anthony Ricciardelli in this latest bond round that's coming up. So I actually very much wanted to be on that. And we can talk a lot more about that if you'd like. So I've been involved in that. I've been involved politically here with some candidates. Very close to somebody that a lot of us in Plano know, Shelby Williams. I was involved in his campaign through a few cycles. And when he decided he was going to run for county commissioner and step out, candidly, one of the really prevailing reasons that I decided to run for this seat is I felt that in being involved with his campaign, he and I had made some pledges to citizens, and there's still a couple years left in this seat. And so I felt really kind of almost an obligation to try to run and win and continue to do the work that Shelby has done in that seat. Now, who knows? Somebody pointed out to me that if I win, I could actually serve 2 more terms and be one of the longest city council people ever, because I guess there's 10 years I could serve. But that's a whole other thing, obviously. And but anyway, that's kind of what I've been involved in.
Wonderful. Yes, we here follow the zoning at Plano's Political Pitbull very closely. We often comment on zoning cases that we do not favor. Some we do. We are happy with. So we've followed and we've watched your votes. And overall, we've been very happy with the way you have voted on planning and zoning in the past.
Well, thanks. I'm happy about that. I mean, when I was sitting there, I really felt my duty, regardless of my own personal opinions, was to really take in what was best for Plano, for everyone. The people who are homeowners, people who are living in apartments at this point, people who have businesses large and small. So I tried to balance that, but there's certain precepts that I thought were critical. I was involved for a couple of years, it seemed like at least, working on the comprehensive plan. And probably, I know you know this, that plan was a reaction to the Plano Tomorrow plan.
Yes, we were following that.
And by the way, that Plano Tomorrow plan was the thing that made me politically aware and interested, because of the way that manifested itself. I didn't think it was handled at all right.
Mm-hmm.
And, where us, the citizens, didn't get to vote, and ultimately the courts decided that was true. But in sitting on planning and zoning, then I was able to craft, there was a citizens committee. Planning and zoning was kind of in the middle, and ultimately to pass our recommendations on to the city council. And so we worked on that, and I was really proud and happy to serve on that. It was interesting. And I think, it was unanimous vote throughout all of those different groups. We delivered a plan to the city for the next 25, 30 years that I think is well crafted in guiding our city. So I was happy to be part of that.
I remember the Plano Tomorrow plan. I remember when it was passed, and the shock that I had of sitting there in the gallery at City Hall in the chamber, where it was a standing only room. And basically you had speaker after speaker after speaker who was totally against it. The other side had to bus in folks from out of town. They were from Dallas. I don't know where else they were from, but I know that there were some people there from Dallas. But the residents of Plano were so against that plan, and it was shocking to me that the planning and zoning and the city council totally disregarded their over 300 plus residents that were in the room. And then, as well as anybody who wrote in, emailed in. It was so shocking. That was actually my first glimpse into city government and how important local government is. So I remember that well.
Absolutely. It was what I felt kind of an egregious, thumbing of the nose at the citizens, who it seemed, you don't know what's in anybody's heart, I guess, but it certainly seemed to me as if the then city council and a lot of the leaders really didn't care what the vast majority of citizens thought about that plan. And so, and you can still see that somewhat in government. I think, by the way, not to derail this discussion too much, but this particular election is critically important for that reason. We have a chance, and it's one of the reasons I jumped in on this thing late, and that's been a whirlwind. But and I've got so much support from the community. It's humbling, honestly. With that said, this election, we have a chance to put conservative Plano citizen leaders into that city council. And there are 4 of us that are working really collaboratively, because we share a lot of ideas. And if we get in, I think we can bring a voice that will be good for the entire city. My fear is, and you look at cities around the country, and when you don't have enough conservative voices in government leadership, it is frightening what can happen and how quickly it can happen. I know that we're going to have some serious challenges in Plano as we look forward. We've done so many great things, but I think that, as a mature city, the challenges are changing, and I think we need experienced, wise leadership that will especially look at things financially conservative. Mm-hmm. And so this is a critical election, but all of my interest was spawned back then, and I'll tell you what happened. I started seeing some things, and I started nosing around, and I called my representative, Anthony Ricciardelli. We had coffee over at Starbucks. And, of course, I don't drink coffee, I drink tea. I think he had coffee. He had it as a mix. So, anyway, we started talking about government and the Plano Tomorrow plan. And I said, gosh, I want to get involved, because typically I'm so busy with the businesses I'm involved in leading that I don't have time. I used to travel a lot. And so he said, hey, this Shelby Williams guy, you can jump in and support him. And there's a lady, Lily Bow. So I met those two. I became friends with them. I supported their campaign. And, my first political activity was really out at the polls, doing poll reading for Shelby and Lilly. And I got involved since then. But it really was Anthony that encouraged me to do that. And, of course, he's terming out. Carson Underwood is one of the guys running for his seat. I'm a big fan of his, but that's a whole other story. But anyway, that was the genesis of me jumping into this stuff. And it's been interesting. But the Plano Tomorrow Plan was the thing that got my interest. It just was hard to understand how city leadership could really ignore their taxpayers, their voters, their citizens that much and spend a lot of our tax dollars in a lawsuit to try to keep us from having a voice. I mean, it just seemed egregious to me.
Yes, I remember that very well too. I followed that lawsuit. It was also shocking. I think what I have seen is people want to feel like their representatives are hearing them and listening to them. You're not always going to agree, because I know one representative who's no longer a congressman now, but he worked his way up, started out in the Texas House, and I didn't agree with everything he did, but I always felt like he heard me, and he would listen and take the time to hear his constituents, and he'd explain his reasonings for why he voted a certain way. And I think that people will give their reps grace if they feel like they've been heard, their rep has evaluated what they've said, really weighed the different sides, and has taken both sides into consideration. And if you come up with a differing view and they vote maybe not how you like 100% of the time, they'll give you some grace. But with the Plano Tomorrow Plan, I felt like there was such an overwhelming opposition to it that it should have at least been tabled and said, let's go back and figure out where we can make the changes. And that didn't happen. I need to move on, though, to some more questions. And speaking of government, what are the core functions of government?
Well, I think they're very similar across most governments. But I think the first obligation of government is to provide safety for their citizens as much as is possible. And then I believe that they should provide foundational elements for the society, roads, those types of things. And so, it's my opinion, and gosh, we're seeing a lot in the environment we're in now. But like any organization or any group of people, things tend on a path and they grow until they run into something and they stop. And so, it's my opinion that government too often is trying to do too many things when they really should be left to the private sector. So, I think government's job is to provide safety for us, to provide, the different vehicles that can allow us, roads, other things like that can help us transport around. And to me, those are the fundamental roles of government. And the smaller the government, the better. And I believe in America, America historically, we've got an interesting citizenry. And America and the American citizens figure things out. And when we need something, we solve it. And too often, I think government gets in the way because they seem to always go too far. And so, I don't know, I guess, that's overreaching. That's how I would answer your question.
Mm-hmm. No, that is a very, very good, thorough answer. So you said, obviously safety, obviously infrastructure such as roads, water, sewer, those types of things are core
Absolutely.
functions, which is basically things that most people can't do for themselves. Most people can't create a water system, or well, they can build a road, but obviously everybody would be sharing in the road.
Well, absolutely. I mean, Jennifer, we can do it. I mean, I can put in a road out in front of my house maybe, but then my property ends somewhere. I guess I could drill a well and I could create, some kind of sewer out, but when,
Septic
especially
system.
when you're living in cities,
Yes.
There's a fabric there that needs to happen, and it can happen better when we all work together. Otherwise, we're really kind of probably infringing on our next door neighbor as we come up with our ideas.
Yes.
But those are the things that I think are really important, and if done well, they allow the free enterprise system and the ingenuity of the American citizens to flourish and do wonderful things as we have.
Mm-hmm. So if it is not a core function, should the taxpayers be forced to pay for it? I'll give you an example. Rec centers, senior citizen center. We've got a whole bunch of parks and trails, almost, in my view, almost more than we need. Should a taxpayer be forced to pay for it, or should that be something that the private sector does?
Well, gosh, I mean, you could ask that question about a lot of things. I mean, the schools are a hot button right now in terms of school choice and things. Mm-hmm. And, I think that's a complex answer when you're living in a society and you're sharing things. And so while I could certainly make the case that the answer is no, we should never do that. But I don't know that that's true. But I think that, to your point, and I said it earlier, government typically keeps going too far. So, if one senior center is good, then 3 is better. But when we agree to live in a city like Plano, and we have elections, if the political candidates are clear about what it is they're running on and what they believe on, and if citizens vote them in, then sometimes within reason, I think, yes, we will share resources at times for things that maybe we don't need or don't agree with. And I think that's part of living in a civilization. But I think too often it happens in an unfettered way, and the taxpayer dollars are not guarded as jealously. I'll just tell you, I think you can make a case here in Plano, and I love our city. We moved here purposely when we came to Texas. And so this was the community we wanted to live in for a lot of reasons. And then, like I said, my kids moved here, and now we've got 3 grandkids, soon the 4th, born here in Plano. So,
wow, that's tough.
But I think you could make the case that Plano has a bit of what I call affluenza. I mean, we've had a lot of revenues come in, and it is my opinion, and it's one of the reasons I want to run for this office, is I've got a lot of experience managing big budgets across big organizations and complex things and dealing with challenging problems. And, my career's been filled with that, and it's been fun most of the time. But, I think I'll give you a couple examples. Like, we discovered that Plano, we put in, and I was involved, I voted for the backyard chickens. And that was kind of a funny thing because originally it came through, and it was like, okay, you can have 10 hens. And I said, okay, well, wait a minute. Do you know peacocks are hens? Because no one should have 10 peacocks in their backyard. So anyway, we had to fix the language a little bit, and such as these things. But, okay, so now you can have 10 female chickens, 10 female hens in your backyard. Okay, great. And, through some of the things that went on, I think some of the citizens that took advantage of that are probably happy they could get some eggs. But anyway, so the next thing I found out is we needed a shelter for the chickens, for the wayward chicken, one escapes or whatever, just like a lost dog, cat, whatever.
Right. Yes.
And so I found out the total cost with architecture fees and everything, we were going to spend $65,000 on a chicken coop to house wayward chickens.
Yes,
And
this was
there
one
are
of
other things that are similar, and I don't think they're ill-intended. I just don't think they're wisely crafted. I mean, I could give you other examples.
Yeah.
Being involved in planning and zoning, how I have, and listen, we have a city staff that, and I think the city council, these are good people, and they're working hard. But we need the experience for people that can carve through things and ask some questions, and aren't afraid of asking the question that maybe some people don't want you to ask. And if you watch me on planning and zoning, I did it a lot because I wanted full disclosure and total transparency. And sometimes, to me, deception could be from omission, and so. But I mean, I just think as we head forward, we need people who know and can assist city staff and manage our budget wisely so that we're not making some really tough choices down the road. I met with the police association, and they told me that they are forced to go out with the plates for their bulletproof vests that are expired. Now, I don't
heard
know what
that.
the complete risk of that is, but it doesn't seem that that's the best idea, especially in the environment we're seeing for our law enforcement officers here nationally. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to dig into our budget and find savings where our tax dollars could be better spent or even reduce them.
We're going to talk about the budget a little later. I have to tell you, I don't know if you heard the chicken coop episode we did, but Ruth and I did a chicken coop episode. You can find it on our website. You can find it on Spotify and YouTube. And it's one of the funnier episodes we've done and one of the more higher rated ones we've done because it's actually, I kind of surprised Ruth a little bit, and her reaction to the cost of the chicken coop that was being proposed is hysterical. But when I say that,
I am pretty proud of that because an associate of mine who shall remain nameless at the moment, and I discovered this and started pushing it forward. But it's a big budget. And you have to be able to go through that in a productive way to sometimes provide guidance. So anyway.
Yes. So what I mean by if it's not a core function, should the taxpayers pay for it? Obviously, I'm not saying that we should tear down the rec centers we currently have. I have said we might consider selling them, but
I might consider what?
I said we might consider selling them to like a gym owner or something, but that's my pontificating. What I'm referring to is basically the idea that I've heard that we need a senior center on the west side. Well, we have a senior center. We just renovated a senior center. I don't know of any town that has more than one senior center. Some towns don't have any. So for us to build another senior center, to me, is something I don't want to pay for as a taxpayer when we have a perfectly good one, 15 minutes away from the west side? Not even. And then there's been talk about having an arts center.
Yes, that was actually discussed in the in the bond proposal, which was interesting. But just getting back to the subject you brought up, I think that we need to be mindful of we're not providing city services at cost to taxpayers. The private businesses should provide at no cost to the taxpayers and at cost to the users. So I agree with the direction. I think we have to be thoughtful there. And, before a new senior center needs to be built because it's a nice idea, I think we need to look at all kinds of options. Off the top of my head, for instance, let's do a real analysis of the one on the east side. Is the reason we need one on the west side because the one on the east side is overrun or not? And so, maybe there's a usage issue there. But what about some other things? I mean, the Mule and Beth, we're completely revitalizing that. why not carve out part of that for seniors? I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's not a good idea. But running a business, if you're going to run it successfully, you really have to dig in every corner to make sure you have clearly defined the problem and you have the right solution. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's opportunity to do that better. And so, but I understand your point of, hey, I don't necessarily want to pay for a senior center on the West. I get it. And, especially in an environment where the economy is challenged, our property taxes are high. And so, I think we have to be very conservative with our citizens' tax dollars. And I think we need to look for really great solutions for some of the problems we have. And maybe they're a little different than some people think. Maybe there are other solutions, but I think they have to be explored.
Yes, that makes sense to me. So part of being on city council, you're going to be dealing with economics. So the next few questions are dealing with economics. What economic school of thought do you get your economic philosophy from?
Well, a good friend of mine would suggest Milton Friedman would be a great place to start. And I won't pretend to be an economic academia. But I'm a believer in free market, largely free trade. I'm a believer in those things. Mm-hmm. I'm a believer in very conservative fiscal management, by the way, not just for governments, but I think for families. Mm-hmm. My wife and I have always managed our finances that way. And so I guess I don't have a perfect answer for what school of thought I have there, to be candid with you.
So from what you've said, it sounds like you're the Chicago or Austrian School of Economics. Milton Friedman, he was part of the Chicago School of Economics, but he learned what he learned as part of the Austrian School of Economics from Friedrich Hayek. So it sounds like you're more of a of an Austrian School of Economics instead of a
I'll have to take your word for that.
Instead of a Marxist or a Keynesian.
I can tell you I'm not a Marxist, and I'm not a Keynesian. Those things I do know. But, so I'll have to take your word for the Austrian one.
All right. Well, you kind of answered my second question on Dead or Alive, who is your favorite economist. Are you for or against corporate welfare?
Did you say corporate welfare?
I did.
Define it a little bit for me.
Okay, so corporate welfare is when, also called corporatism, some people call it cronyism. It was a birth child, came from the mind of Benito Mussolini in Italy. And basically it takes money from taxpayers and gives it to corporations in these public-private partnerships. Mussolini did this a lot with farming, especially. He did it a lot in business, and it ended up being a catastrophe. It also, there's also a part where you are over-regulating to death. So with fascism, basically, we're not going to own the means of production, but we're going to tell you how everything should be run in your business to the minute detail. Maybe you will get to choose the color. If you would, let's say Ford, and you are manufacturing cars, we're going to tell you what kind of wheels you should have, how you are supposed to construct the car. Maybe you could choose the color of the cars.
Yeah, well, by and large, I would tell you, I reject almost all of that as, I think, proven failed concepts. I think they undermine free societies and ultimately subject their citizens to servants. And, it can work great. I mean, if you look around the globe, we had some of this with FDR. Maybe, I'm sure you know all about this, but Not
Yes, we
everybody
did.
does, but my wife's grandfather was a farmer, and at times back in the Depression, they made them plow under crops at a time where
Yep.
we were having challenges. So, I prefer to keep government out of as many things as possible. Not that business is perfect, but at the end of the day, businesses will fail if they're not successful and if they're not doing the right things. And government doesn't fail. They just find a way to get more money from us. And so, there are certain things that at times I might support, a partnership like that. I will tell you, I met with the Dallas Morning News yesterday, and my opponent is a giant fan of that. And he said that he sees a lot of opportunity for Plano to, the public-private partnerships that we could do to do things.
Yes.
But, and there may be opportunities where at times that makes sense. I mean, I don't often categorically reject everything because at times, with the right approach, some things can be made to make sense. And so given, in a hypothetical, I'm not even sure how to answer it because I'd have 50 questions for it, and it comes from my business background.
So,
I like to define things clearly so that I can say, the question I typically ask in leading any business is precisely what are we trying to accomplish? I mean, what is it? What will it look like when it's done, and how do we get there? Because too often I think we charge off and we really don't know where we're heading. It takes on its own life. But so, I'm not a big fan of that. I've seen it in our own country. You don't just have to go to Mussolini. By the way, I think you may challenge me on this, but I think FDR actually thought that a lot of things that Mussolini was doing were really good.
He did at first.
So I know that to be true. But,
yes.
So there's a lot of interesting things in our own history here. You don't have to go all the way to Italy to look at some failed ideas. But so I'm largely not a fan of that. And, when you look at it's a challenging thing. So at times when you look at, let's take a pro football team that some people might care about and some might not. And you've got that stadium there and you've got jobs and all those things. And then the stadium says, hey, we're going to move if the city doesn't support us. And I think at times that can be a very challenging decision for cities for a lot of reasons. So, and I don't, the answer to all of those, I think, would happen only after you fully examine everything to determine if it was the right thing. But in general, I'm for keeping government smaller. I'm for allowing private companies to do their thing. I'm for trying to not attach too much over-regulation to companies because I know it slows them down. Even in starting a company anymore, there's so many hoops you have to jump through. It's challenging for somebody to do it and to prosper. I mean, it's expensive, it's inefficient. So I'm for reducing regulations anywhere you can. I'll tell you, in any business, you're going to have bad actors, bad performers. What I try to do in running a business, and I do it no different than anything I could in government, is I don't want to make a rule for one person that makes all these great people follow something because you might have somebody over here that's doing the wrong thing. Instead, I'd rather deal with the wrongdoer and let all the productive people continue to do what they need to do without the anchors of what might happen from some bad actor. And again, I wouldn't categorically say that. There's some things that might be so egregious that you do need to legislate or put rules in. But, that's my opinion.
So another word for this, and what the city calls it, is economic development. And why should a large company that nets millions of dollars a year get taxpayer money when it doesn't need it? I'll give you an example. Raising Cane's got $6 million for...
They got how much?
They got $6 million for basically moving down the street. The man is worth billions of dollars who owns it. He could have written a check. All right. So his company did not need that money. But we gave him $6 million could just to move down the street from one part of Granite Park to the next part, I think, or, Legacy. And that was something that we talked, Ruth and I talked about. We follow economic development a lot. We talk about it. We tell in our episodes how much the companies are worth, whether they're public or private, what their shares are going for on the day that we're recording. And for us, it just seems, first of all, unfair. Also, you are interfering with the free market when governments do that. When they hand out money to large companies, they're picking winners and losers, which is interfering with the invisible hand of the free market. And when companies are asked, economic development is the last thing they consider when moving to a new place. What they say they would rather have is low taxes and low regulations. So do you think it's fair that large companies would get taxpayer money that don't need it?
Well, fair is an interesting word, so I don't know.
All right. Would you prefer the word right?
Fair to who?
Would you prefer the word right? Is it right?
Say that one more time, please.
Is it right?
It's right. Well, again, that's an interesting word. So let me throw in a hypothetical. What if all of the companies that currently are anchored here and working, the ones that have driven so many jobs here in Plano, which I do think have been accretive to some regard in making this the community it is. What if Salina came in and said, we're offering all of you guys something, and all of those companies moved out? Because, it's a hypothetical, right? But now, would that be good long-term for the Plano residents that are here today? So, I understand, and I'm not a giant fan of corporate welfare. I mean, you look at these big stadiums that are built, and it seems like it's not the right thing for so much of the city. But, I would tell you that I think each one of these things needs to be looked at separately. And is it right? I mean, I could make a case that it's not right. But I have to look at it really comprehensively to determine the total effect on the city and all of the citizens before. To me, it's an investment. And will that investment give a return to this city that is in our city's best interest? And I would, if I was on council, I would want that clearly defined. And, it might not just be in dollars. But, with some of these economic development things comes other problems. You get more traffic. And so I think you have to look through all of it. And so without looking at a specific case, I would be hesitant to answer that, because I could find cases where I go, no, it's not, and we shouldn't do it. Mm-hmm. And I might lean that way more often than not. Mm-hmm. But I also might find cases where it does make sense and that it is good for our community. I've run companies that are national in scale. And so I know a lot. I used to run all of the retail, sales, operations, and real estate for the Sleep Number company. And just under $1 billion. And I was there with a long time. They recruited me years ago, and it was a blast being with that company. We redefined an industry. It was so much fun. I have seen communities go downhill without wise management, where you have a vibrant community, and over 10, 12 years, it is devastating. And, that could have easily happened here, too. And I'm still nervous about some of our areas. This Willow Bend Mall that I was involved in, talking to Steve Levin and trying to get that thing revitalized, or Collin Creek. If these things don't happen, what happens to our community? It's a complex thing. Mm-hmm. But I've seen neighborhoods really just fall off the grid, once thriving neighborhoods that, aren't. And Plano is really fantastic place to be, and everybody knows it, and people come here. So I think it's a complex answer. And what I think is, the reason I'm running for city council is I've got the experience to sort through these kind of issues and come up with a wise decision for all of our citizens. Mm-hmm. So that's how I see it.
Okay, we're going to do case-by-case basis then. What do you think instead of economic development? And actually, before I ask this question, I want to go back to your Salina hypothetical. So a company has many factors when looking into moving. Are they going to have a workforce there? What's their workforce? The traffic considerations. Where are their people going to live? I don't necessarily think we have to necessarily worry about Salina. Frisco, I could understand. Frisco did take our Dr. Pepper headquarters from us. And that was something that was pretty shocking. Now it's Keurig, obviously, but so that was pretty shocking that they're obviously that must have been an economic development thing, and so they
Salina was just purely a hypothetical. Yeah. It was just an easy city. We've got plenty of land up there, so it was a hypothetical.
So instead of economic development, would you rather be in favor of a business tax cut? For example, the part of a business's taxes are their actual individual property, not necessarily land and the building, but you wouldn't know this, their computers, their chairs, their equipment, their desks, things of that nature that they are taxed on. It's actually, they're taxing them on a depreciating asset. So would you be willing to look at cutting that tax instead of the giving of money, cutting the taking away of it?
Well, I would view that through the lens of ultimately what are we trying to accomplish and what's in the best interest of our citizens. So I very well may if that worked. But again, I would look at each thing individually, scrutinize it, look for ways to accomplish what we need. And, it might be, what this company wants, we're not willing to give it, or it's not in the best interest of our citizens to give money, to give an economic incentive, to get a tax cut. And here's what we can offer them. But we're not going to get into a bidding war. We're not going to do these things because we don't believe that's in the best interest of our citizens. So again, I would just have to look at each one of these things individually, do full research, try to, have all of the different options, and then really try to do what I thought was right in the best interest of our city. And that's what I did for 4 years on P&Z. And frequently, my solution was a little different than seemingly some of the other people on P&Z who wanted to put multifamily apartments everywhere. So now, even the lenders are saying, hey, we're not so keen on lending for multifamily. For several years ago, I started talking about the oversaturation, and we're going to reach a point where we're going to have more apartments than we need, and we're at that point. Lenders may be our savior in the short term, but it's too often. I was feeling like I thought founded arguments were falling on deaf ears, and it's one of the reasons I want to sit on city council, because my vote there will carry more impact than my vote was on planning and zoning, and especially when you look at how planning and zoning gets put together and how people get appointed and all those things. Getting a seat on city council and having a voice there, especially if we can be successful in this next election coming up with putting conservatives on that council, we can make some changes here and restructure some things that I think will be in the better interest of Plano.
All right, very good.
But I would have to have a specific to give you an answer, because I think depending on how you look at things on some of the things you're asking, I think they're wonderful questions. They will be important questions. And what I will do is study it to the best of my ability. Talk to people like you to get your input.
All right.
And get the best perspective I can get to make the best decision for our city.
Okay. Would you be in favor of more TIFs or TERS zones? These are tax increment finance zones where basically the property taxes collected from that area go into a separate fund and can only be used for that area or that zone. Currently, we are up to 5. Would you be in favor of more?
I don't think so. I'd have to look deeply at really the outcome of that particular strategy. And I guess use wisely at times, possibly with what you're trying to accomplish. I'll give you an example. Like maybe downtown Plano, we're really trying to make that more robust. You could argue whether that matters or not. I think it would be great to have a more robust downtown. I think it's good. It can be great. So possibly in something like that, there would be benefit to the entire city, possibly. There's some cities I've actually talked to Mark Isrelson, our city manager, about looking at some cities that I've visited that have done some really great things for their downtown, and their citizenry is proud of it, and they use it, and they like it. And so, maybe for something like that. But in general, I would say I doubt it.
Actually, I believe, I don't know if all of downtown is part of a TIF zone, but there is a portion that is, I know that there's a part of it that is already a TIF zone.
But let me say this about that. I think if you're going to do that, not only do you need to fully determine what you're trying to do, but you need to have measurements to make sure that it's happening. You need to have timelines to make sure that it's progressing. And you need to have an exit strategy if, in fact, what you thought was going to work doesn't work, because sometimes it doesn't. And so, all of those things need to happen. I was talking to, some of our first responders, and there was a big issue there, and they asked if I'd be in favor of it. I said I might be, but I'm also in favor of, precisely what is it going to accomplish? How are we going to measure it? And if it doesn't work, what's our exit strategy, as opposed to saying, yes, I'm for it? Because sometimes things don't work as well as you want. And so you have to know all those things. And, it's no different in a business, in my opinion. Because you don't have to do any of it, but you probably should do all of it. And that is the way I would approach it.
Okay. Speaking of taxes, homeowners are having a real problem with the raising of property taxes. Some people who don't qualify for a tax freeze or other exemptions are being taxed out of their homes. One idea floating around is to eliminate property taxes and go to a consumption tax. Have you looked into this idea?
I have talked about it some. As a matter of fact, Shelby Williamson and I have talked about it, because I know he's a proponent of it.
Yes,
and I think it needs to be carefully done. But I believe that property taxation for private homes, especially, it is a harsh tax. You never pay it off. You're never mortgage free because you've got the property taxes, and so in essence, you don't own your home.
Yep.
So, in general, I would be in favor of continuing to push these taxes down and find other ways to fund our government. I'm in favor of that. It needs to be carefully constructed, and I think it can be. But, we don't have income tax, and I believe that is a wonderful thing. I moved here from a high tax state. And at one point in my career, I was living in California. I was like, I got to get out of this place. But, so I think all of it needs to be carefully handled. I say that about everything. But I am in favor of moving that direction. And I think if we could find a sound approach to eliminating property taxes, especially on homes, I think that would be a good thing for our citizens.
I do too. It's really been very hard for some people. You know, they don't get the freeze. They're not old enough to get the freeze, but maybe they've paid off their mortgage and they still have, $1,000 a month in property taxes that they have to pay. So
I'm very sympathetic to that.
Yeah.
I mean, I've spoken about my daughter. Her and her husband, they've got a young family. They're both working hard. And, the property taxes are expensive. And then, you get into the question of public schools and all the money we're spending there. And some people are reticent to send their kids to the public schools for their own reasons. But you're still, you want to talk about something you're forced to pay for that you're not going to use. The public schools could be high on the list. But I went to public schools and I went to state institutions, and they served me well. But all of these things roll up, and they do put pressure on people.
Yes, they do. They do. So this is something that's been a pet peeve of mine. That's in the budget. Should the residents of Plano pay for your dinner on council meeting days?
I'm sorry, you cut out there. I didn't hear the question.
Should the residents of Plano pay for your dinner on council meeting days?
Yes, they should. They should pay for my dinner every day after I get elected and get a tremendously delicious dessert. I think I should get to eat at Albernays every night as a council member. Would you support that?
No.
Oh, gosh. As planning and zoning, they push the dinners out there, and
wait. They purchase
as a person.
They push your wait. Hold on. Wait. I didn't know this. They also pay for planning and zoning people's dinners.
Yeah, the guys that are doing the real work. So they're modest. I don't know what they actually cost. Should they pay for it? I don't know. Do you know how much planning and zoning gets paid a month to be on the commission?
Well, I think it's zero. So actually, I would not.
No, it's not. It's $40 a month. So
Oh, I wasn't aware that you got something.
But none of us joined that to get a free dinner where it's $40 or whatever. A lot of people didn't take it, but probably you don't necessarily need to provide dinners for them. No.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But I will say this. I do say this. So there are times where these people are they're sacrificing for our community. And, the city council, I think they get a little over $1,000 a month until you run a campaign and things. If you get elected to city council, you're going to be way in the hole. It's going to cost you money to serve on city council. A whole different discussion. And at times, you're there and you're there late. And so as a citizen, as a city council member or as a planning and zoning person, I don't necessarily need the dinners. I didn't care that much. But I'm personally not offended if they're going to be there for 5, 6, 7 hours. Maybe they get off work and they're scrambling to get to the city council meeting with what the right people will do in city council. I personally don't mind buying them a dinner.
Okay. I don't know. It's.
I was kidding on Albernays.
I know you were kidding.
Just in case other people think this guy's out of his mind. That was a joke.
Yes, I know that was a joke. I got that it was a joke towards the end there. So the thing is that when you're talking about a city budget, every penny to me matters. What other items would you cut? Is there anything you have specifically in mind?
Not at this moment, because until I get in that seat, I would want to do a comprehensive study of the line items, which is hard to do, but I'm used to doing it. And I would look at it comprehensively. So I would cut the chicken coop. How about that? So that would be cut, and I've lobbied for that already. I'm sure there are a number of things that could be cut. Some of the things we do. I'll give you another example I discovered through a friend of mine who, when I was on P&Z, we're doing a project, and the gravel, the rock, the decorative rock that we're going to use was Mexican beach pebble. Do you know anything about Mexican beach pebble?
I do not.
No one does, except this guy. And so he called and said, "Hey, this is planned for Mexican beach pebble to cover as a ground cover." I went, "Okay, so what?" He goes, "It is by far the most expensive rock you can use because they're hand sourced one by one on beaches in Mexico. They're 5, 6, 7 times more expensive than any other decorative rock you could use."
Wow.
So there's a lot of things I know like that I don't think they're ill-intended. I just think they're improperly done, where we don't need decorative rock over a piece of ground we're covering that costs 5 or 6 times more than something else we could put there. I promise you there's a lot of things I will find that I will challenge. But until I get in there, I think you have to balance it. And then some things, I would just say, hey, a strategy I use when I go in, and a lot of times I've gone into companies who are bringing me in to change things, almost always. Mm-hmm. One of my first questions is, when's the last time you stopped doing anything? Do you ever strategically abandon anything? The answer is almost always no. Organizations don't stop doing things. And at times, some of the things they're doing are completely unnecessary, outdated, could be done faster, cheaper, better. And so I think you have to look for those things to say, what can we get rid of here without any effect? And I would be doing that if I get elected to council. And I've had a lot of experience at that. And part of that is working with the teams and the citizens. You have a guy that goes, hey, this is a crazy idea right here. Well, you might not know anything about it. And when you're sitting on city council, you only can know so much. It's a very complex, that budget is a big budget, and there's a lot of complex things in it. And so what you have to do is have relationships with people that can help you do things. If I was sitting on city council, I would hope somebody would come up and go, hey, somebody's planning to build a $65,000 chicken coop, and if you guys approve this, you're going to look stupid. I mean, you have to have the relationships with people who are down in that chain, will raise their hand and go, hey, do you really want to do this? And I've done that in business, and I would try to do that in government. And right now, I think I have good relationships with a lot of the city staff. I have discussions with them on P&Z, and I think I can bring help and solutions to helping them do their jobs. And some of the city council people that will be there after, Anthony and Shelby and Rick Smith and the others leave, Casey leaves, I know of ones that are left, and I have working relationships with them. And that collaboration, I think, can produce great results when you've already got a foundation where you can talk to somebody about something that's challenging and have a meaningful conversation.
I definitely think knowing people who are experts in certain areas, and you can ask and go and ask questions like, maybe having a friend that's a contractor. I asked somebody one time who I knew was a contractor in commercial real estate, and I said, hey, how is this? They were wanting money for a sidewalk. And I asked the guy, I said, is this high? Is this correct? And he looked at it and he was like, actually, that's actually the going rate for redoing a sidewalk. So yeah, that's close. But yeah, really studying those things and asking, what is this Mexican rock? How much does this particular thing cost? Can we get anything cheaper? Obviously, a $70,000 chicken coop. Me personally, I would not have been able to not fight and say, and stop myself from saying, have you lost your mind?
It's not possible for the city council people to dig into every one of those things. I think what's possible is to get a working relationship, especially with the city manager, where you have an organization that really is looking at these things, and it's rewarded for bringing up things that maybe people don't want to hear, punished for that. You're rewarded for that. But, most organizations will tell you that they have an open door policy and that, hey, we really talk freely about stuff. It's just not true. It's almost never true. It's not. We're human beings. We operate a certain way, and so you have to be very careful in building that. And it's one of the things I was really proud of. I mentioned a local company I worked here with sleep experts, and we were constantly voted by our employees as one of the best places to work. Why? They knew they had a voice. They knew they could come to me and the other executives and say, hey, I think this is a problem. And they weren't going to get chastised for it. A lot of times I'd say, well, I understand why you think that. Let me tell you what else is going on. And by simply explaining the things they didn't yet see, they go, oh, well, that makes sense. Well, yeah. And you couldn't know that, but I'm glad you asked. Because I wanted people raising their hand and going, I don't understand this, or I think this is a bad idea, or I think you're out of your mind. So, and you have to facilitate an environment where people are willing to do that. Because most people just, in human nature, it's not our nature to push boulders uphill. And it doesn't take very much from leadership. Just a couple things. Even if you might have a somewhat of an open door policy, one ill-considered move will slam that door and people go, oh gosh, I went and talked to them and look what happened to me. They're like, I got chastised. And pretty soon everybody's like, well, okay, well, they don't want to hear. And it's very counterproductive in any organization. I believe, somebody asked me this the other day, I believe trust is at the absolute foundation of every successful relationship. And I think it's very challenging to build, and I think it's very easy to destroy.
Yes, well, that's why, like I said, it would have been hard for me to not just that come out of my mouth. Like, how did we get this number? Does it have a spa attached to it? What are we doing here? But yeah,
there was a gym in there for the chickens. They had daycare. They had daycare for the little peeps. I mean, I think once it's built, we will be proud of it. It'll be the chicken coop of excellence in the city.
Yes.
By the way, I have a horrible habit of abusing myself.
All right. Well, speaking of money. Something else that Shelby Williams, Councilman Williams, wants to do is try to steer clear or try to reduce the amount of maintenance we are paying with bonds. I mean, it's one thing to build a new road, brand new road, right? And you say, we're going to use a bond to build this brand new road, and we're going to call it Preston Road. It's another thing to constantly be taking out loans to then pay for the maintenance of those roads. I mean, the maintenance and operations side of the property tax is just that, maintenance and operations, as Shelby Williams says. It's baked right in the word. Would you want to continue that sort of way forward, trying to avoid taking out major debt to pay for things that should be just natural upkeep, because things do get old? Like, should we, we are going to have to replace a roof every now and again. Should that come with a loan with a lot of interest? Or should we try to make sure that we saving money on things that we know are going to come up and need repairs?
Well, let's just start with this. I am debt resistant. Although debt isn't always an evil word. I mean, there's times where it's actually accretive. Also there's always cost to it, even unintended. But so I'm an advocate of avoiding any debt that we can. And far too many governments. I mean, look at the national debt we have. I mean, it's insane.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm against debt, and I think the cities need to be thoughtful of that. Let's talk about the roads a little bit. As I sat in on the bond committee, we were presented $700 million. I listened to the call yesterday, and I think Karen said that the original number was 1.6 billion. I thought it was 1.3, but I won't argue with her. So 1.6 down to 700 million, and I guess that means that there's 900 million dollars worth of stuff that we still need to fix out there, supposedly. Okay. So, but so now let's talk about the roads, and we're like a little over 300 million, I think, in the bonds, maybe 361. I don't know if that's the right number, but I think it's close on roads and infrastructure, and probably. And we sat through this, and I think probably that money is needed to keep these roads moving forward. Then you get to the question of how. So, in watching what's going on with Plano roads, it is no secret, it's no mystery that these roads were going to need to be repaired. And it seems to me, it's always easy to criticize everyone else, so I'm not trying to do that, but maybe I'll end up doing that. It seems to me that we waited way too long to do some of this, and we could have had a different schedule because, if you listen to the call last night on the bonds, a lot of the calls were about the roads. And when you talk to the city council people, and I know a lot of them,
Mm-hmm.
and their calls are about these roads and potholes and traffic cones, and we've moved from the city of excellence to the city of cones. So I think we could have been wiser in planning this so that it wasn't all hitting at once.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when money wasn't costing anything, if you actually were going to borrow, if you needed the bonds, gosh, when the cost of money a few years ago was lower, maybe we should have had a little more foresight to say, okay, well, this is going to cost us less.
Mm-hmm.
Because, they're talking about the cost of this bond is, $647 million or whatever it is now.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the cost of the bond. That plus the interest over 20 years is the cost of the bond.
Correct.
So I think that where we can, and I've heard a lot of discussion about this back and forth. I know it's been said by staff that there's really no way to get to what Shelby is proposing.
Mm.
And so, that's been on public record, I think. So,
wow.
But I'm not sure that that's true. And so I think that it is likely that this city is going to have to do certain things with bonds going forward. But I would like to find a path to reduce that constantly, where we're not incurring debt and the extra cost that goes with it. Because, over time, I think it's going to be, about, when you roll up the total cost, about a third of it's going to be debt.
Yeah.
And I would like to find ways to avoid that. So, I can't tell you at this moment that I completely understand the path forward, but I think that dialogue needs to happen. But it's, if I get elected by myself or Cody Weaver or Hayden or Carson, that's going to be one voice, and it's not going to get heard. If this city wants stuff like this to happen, then you voters better elect a bunch of us so that we can have a voice. Otherwise, part of Shelby's comments were, in my opinion, largely acknowledged and ignored.
Yes, they were. They said that, and this part I wasn't fully understanding. That, well, if we take away the debt side, then the property taxes are going to go up, which didn't make sense to me. Your property taxes are a combination of your debt and your M&O. If the debt goes down,
There could be a point where early on, and again, I haven't researched this fully, so where early on it might cost you a little bit more to front load it as opposed to paying it later. But I think it needs to be fully explored. And you know what? if the position that, hey, your taxes would go up, if in fact that is a provable fact, then let's show it. Because we don't need our taxes to go up. So
No.
if the most efficient way from a taxpayer perspective is using bonds, then let's show that. And then I'll go, okay, there's the math. I believe it. Math can do interesting things, right? But there's the math. Okay, fine. I believe it. I've done the research, I'll bring in Milton Friedman. I'll bring him in. But, and so, we'll figure it out.
You have to bring in the seance.
Let's be sure. And, I like to ask more questions than just one sometimes, and I like to see facts.
That's always a good way to operate. Definitely.
A guy years ago told me nothing messes up a good argument like just a couple facts.
Well, you worked for a lot of businesses. I mean, you know that businesses can't always take out debt, but if they know that they're going to need to do maintenance on their properties, don't usually the business has that baked into their budget, that they're going to put aside money when things are going to come up that they're going to need fixing?
Yeah, you better do it. If listen, you don't have to do anything ever, but survival is never guaranteed. You don't have to do anything.
Right.
You don't ever have to do anything. But if you want to survive, if you want to flourish, if you want to thrive, then there are things you should do. And that's how I see it. But sure, you can ignore anything. I don't propose that. I find that to be a suicide path. But no, listen. When I'm involved in $3 billion budgets and national companies with 3,000 stores. And one of the things we know, those air conditioning units are going to fairly predictable. They're going to wear out. Roofs are going to wear out on a fairly predictable way. Parking lots are going to need to be repaved in a fairly predictable way. Not individually always, but overall, sure, you can run the math. You know it. And so you plan for it.
Right.
Because you know what? If you're in Texas or Arizona in summer and all your air conditioners break and you don't have any money to fix them, your customers are going to leave immediately.
Oh yeah.
And so these aren't hard concepts, and I think we can bake these things in. We know how long these roads are going to last by and large.
I would think they're pretty predictable.
Yeah, but I mean, there's things happen. Weather that is much colder than you ever predicted, or floodwaters that things happen. But,
yes.
But you can't always expect the unexpected, but you can expect the expected.
Exactly. And speaking of roads, I'm going to move this question up.
And by the way, I'm going to have to jump in a little bit. I love the discussion. We planned an hour, so I've got a little bit more time. If that's okay with you.
Okay, that's fine. I can get through these. Will be like a lightning round. What ideas do you have to make the construction easier for the folks on the roads and go faster?
Gosh, I would have thought I submitted this question, so you would ask me. I've already had conversations with Mark Israelson about this. And, I said, I think we need to look at other things to do. And one simple thing is, can we work beyond the hours we're working? Can we find some crews that can do some of this at night in some areas? So to simply accelerate what we're doing. And so he was open to that idea. I think we have to be thoughtful. I mean, we don't need to be jackhammering outside of a neighborhood in the middle of the night, all those things. But where we can, one idea is just to expedite that. Now, there's a couple problems here, though, and I know this to be true. And I will tell you, the lady, Abby, that is in charge of this, I'm impressed with her. I think she's sharp. She knows her stuff. And, one of the issues is the overall staff we have, how much we can manage, and then how that, and the dollars available when we have them. And so all of that has to be baked in. But, you can go hire more crews, but somebody still has to oversee them. And so it can be complex, but I think there's ways we can expedite it if we open ourselves up and start with this premise. Mm-hmm. We need to do this faster than we're doing it right now. Mm-hmm. And then once we get there, we need to be in a consistent management of it, of updating it. And they do have a schedule, but I would challenge to say, okay, do you have all of the different pieces you need to do the schedule as efficiently as possible, or do you need other things? And then can we provide the other things? Mm-hmm. So, but I think that there are ways to accelerate it. They try to not do parallel roads. It seems to me that Park and Parker have been torn up at the same time, but be that as it may. And so I do think there are ways to do it. And sometimes the belief that the things that might work aren't acceptable stops it. To go, well, they'll never go for that, or gosh, so you just got to get past those things and look for the ideal solution. Mm-hmm. There are ways we can do it.
All right. Trump has taken John Stossel's idea of, for every law or regulation that is passed, 2 need to be cut. Would you be in favor of doing this at the city council level for new ordinances? For every new ordinance, cutting 2?
No.
None at all?
No, you asked me a specific question. I answered it. Mm-hmm. No, I wouldn't be in favor of that. What I would be in favor of is being very, very careful what we put in. And I think we need to go back and look at, I said it before, what do you ever stop doing? We need to go back and look at all of these ordinances and say, are they still necessary? And it might not be 1 for 2. It might be, we put 1 in and we take 10 out. I think we need to look, I think we need to have an atmosphere and an environment of where can we get rid of regulations that aren't to the community. Now, you know what? You might be able to talk me into it and say, yeah, but just as a principle, we're doing that because it forces the issue. And, maybe that's a management technique that's needed. But I think a better way to do it would be to really put a committee together. I'll use this word, kind of a Doge ordinance committee to say, what can we get rid of here? And, maybe even some other Doge-like things to really go in and look at things. Because what happens in organizations is you get so busy doing what you have to do, and the demands of the day take up all your time. If you have an effective organization by and large, and you don't have a bunch of people sitting around doing nothing, which also happens in organizations a lot. But so I think at times you need to make sure that you're probably going to do, you need a special team to do some of these things, assuming people, their days are full. And I don't know how busy the city staff is in Plano. They tell me that, that their days are fulfilled. I'll take their word on it, that we are managing the teams fairly effectively. But usually, there's usually some opportunity. But the reason I say no, you asked me a specific question, I wouldn't be in favor of that as a mandate at this moment.
Mm-hmm. But
I am in favor of taking a comprehensive look at all of this stuff over time and determining what we can change.
That sounds great. Wonderful. Have you seen some of the bills in the Texas legislature that are interfering with zoning? We're going to be moving on to zoning questions. So there's many in the Texas legislature that interfere with zoning. Have you seen any of those?
Yes, I have seen some of them, and they worry me. Listen, I don't think this is just a Texas thing. Mm-hmm. This has been coming out of Washington, D.C. for a while. I personally think it, I don't know, I could say it started with Obama. Maybe it didn't. It certainly accelerated with Obama. There is a belief in many places that the local municipalities shouldn't be in charge of their own zoning. There are beliefs that we shouldn't have single-family zoning. I think California has already instituted some things where there is no you're not protected in a neighborhood with single-family zoning, which is an amazing nightmare in my opinion. So I have seen these things, and I do understand some of the impetus for them, because there are communities that do things that probably need to be looked at a little bit. But with that said, I am not for legislation coming out of Austin that tells us how to run our zoning in Plano.
Mm-hmm.
Period.
Yes. I'm with you there. You mentioned the comprehensive plan, and I've noticed that a lot of times, especially in the planning and zoning department, they are going against the comp plan and not following it. Why have zoning? Why have a comp plan if you can just request to change it?
Well, the comprehensive plan is a guide, and I think it's a really well done one. But things change, things evolve, new things happen. And so, I don't think it would be wise to have a comprehensive plan that you can't change. And if you do, then get rid of the P&Z commission, because you don't need it anymore. So I think, ideally, if you've appointed the right people to that commission, when you have something that requires careful consideration,
Mm-hmm.
that there are times where possibly that going against the plan makes sense. But I have to tell you, so 4 years on the commission, before the comprehensive plan came out, it was my opinion that frequently, and there might be good excuses or reasons for this, that it seemed to me that the planning department was leading in directions that didn't seem really to be aligned with the things they should. But I will tell you this, by and large, and maybe it's changed since I stepped out of there in November, but by and large, it's my opinion that the planning department brought things to us that did follow the plan, or when they did, they specified why.
Yes,
so
they
it's
did.
my opinion that since we brought in the new comprehensive plan, that the planning staff has attempted to adhere to it. And I know in
correct.
talking to them, I have good relationships with several of the leaders there. And talking to them, they felt that with all the mishmash that we had before, that they were challenged, and that the new comprehensive plan helped them do their job more clearly and linearly. So I'm not sure,
That's
from my
great.
experience, once we got the plan, that I would agree with you. Now,
Mm-hmm.
if you're going to talk about the Planning and Zoning Commission not following the plan and doing things, absolutely. There were several days,
Mm-hmm.
nights actually, right after I got my dinner. Into the dinner joke. So there were several times that I felt that we didn't follow it, and on more than one occasion, I've said on that dais that I think we're abandoning this plan, and we're getting close to just saying, let's just throw it away. Now, maybe
Yes.
that was a bit of drama on my part, but just felt that there were times, for whatever reason, that we weren't following what we should with that plan, which I think was well constructed, because I have a lot of hours into it, and Doug Shockey and Mike Bronski, who did a good job, and all the citizens that worked on there, Jim Delville and Europe, and all those guys that worked on there, Jackie Crawford. I mean, these people did a good job for us, and so under challenging circumstances. So that's my opinion. My experience once we got the plan, by and large, I thought the staff tried to follow it.
Yes, I wasn't talking about the staff. I was actually talking about the commission. I'm sorry that wasn't clear.
Okay, well, sorry. Well, anyway, you got a bigger answer than you wanted, maybe.
But it was a good answer.
I can't answer that.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
That some things were counterintuitive to me. Good grief. The whole J.C. Penney's thing, which I voted against, where largely we came in and said, hey, well, this is necessary for this development. And I worked with, spent time with the developers up there. But our plan specifically prohibited building, as did our ordinance, building those towers, those high-end apartments they're going to build.
Yeah.
And so the developers are very, they're professional. They say, hey, you want to come and look at the ones we have downtown? I go, no, I don't need to. My comprehensive, I don't care what you build there. My comprehensive plan and my zoning prohibit it. And we don't need to do that. That parcel of land had been reserved for other development. We had made pledges to the surrounding companies, especially Toyota, who, by the way, and I had some conversation with some people at Toyota. They weren't completely excited about it. Ultimately, they donated for a park. It's great. We're talking about this great new hotel. Well, I don't know. Maybe I'm missing it, but I don't know why building luxury apartments is accretive, and the hotel that they want to build, this, I guess, great Japanese hotel, this hotel that they want to build needs apartments to build the hotel. I mean, it's not logical to think. And the same up here at the Haggard property at Windhaven and Parkway. I mean, we specifically, when people bought into Windhaven, and my opponent, by the way, was a catalyst for what happened up there. We'll see how it ultimately manifests itself up there at Windhaven, the northeast corner up there. But we're going to build a bunch of apartments and stuff. And the people that moved into that neighborhood, that was not what was on the plan when they moved in. So we'll see how it works. At a time where we already have so many projects that we've approved that haven't even been started.
Yeah.
So, I think at times, now you could make some arguments that, listen, there's economic development, there's tax-based stuff. But I don't think that we can always make decisions to allow development just because it's going to be accretive to our tax base. We have to look at what it does for the fabric of our community longer term.
And this is a good segue right to my next question. There has been a loss of agricultural land in Plano due to zoning changes. So we will basically soon have none left. The Texas Agricultural Secretary Sid Miller once said, if you don't have agriculture, you'd be naked, you'd be hungry, and you'd always be sober. What can the city do to help our last remaining farms stay farms?
I don't know that. And I don't know how productive the farms are. And I don't know how important they are for the feeding of Plano. So now, if they're producing booze over there, then that's probably a good thing for a lot of our citizens. I don't know. So I don't know. I'm not prepared to answer that question.
Okay.
But my belief is this: unless the citizens here want to invest in turning them into parks, ultimately, I think there's going to be a lot of pressure for them to be something other than farms and parks. And if we go all the way back to the invisible hand on the market, I don't know where that weighs in on this. Oh, by the way, so I don't know how much the city should do.
That is true. Well, part of the problem with the farms disappearing is water. Texas is running out of water. According to Ag Secretary Miller, industries have been wiped out. The sugarcane industry has left Texas because there was not enough water. He also said cities waste about 38% of water. For example, rainwater runoff. That just literally goes down the drain.
I grew up in Arizona.
Oh, really?
Water is sacred to me. As a matter of fact, I was just with a friend who still lives in Phoenix, and he was talking about he's got a little patch of grass up his front yard, and he's talking about changing it because Phoenix and Arizona is so water deprived and so water focused. We will be foolish if we don't look for methods to improve our water situation in Texas, in Dallas, in Plano. Water isn't just a Texas thing. It's going to become a worldwide problem. Fresh water is an issue it's going to be an issue, and as we continue to grow, it's a serious issue.
Yes.
We need, as a city, we need to be looking at
Developers don't bring their own water. You know?
Hey, I apologize. I have another appointment. I'm going to have to jump. Is there anything really paramount? I apologize for being rude, but
I understand. I understand. We went. Well, I guess the only other thing I had was really that was important was housing and DART. You know, we're running out of land in Plano. We're at 50% rentals, 50% ownership.
Yep.
And as you said, apartments are no longer doing well profitably, and banks do not want to finance apartments anymore. What kind of housing would you be in favor of if there's still people out there who want to build, and we have the water to do it?
Well, it's an interesting question of the current citizens of Plano. What is our obligation to provide housing to everyone that wants to move here? Do we have an obligation to do that? No, I don't know. I think it's an interesting question, personally.
Mm-hmm.
But past that, I think we're going to have to be creative. And, there's talk that, hey, Plano needs affordable housing. That's not going to happen based on what most people would call affordable housing.
No, the land is just too expensive.
You've got the cost of land, you've got the cost of labor, you have the cost of materials, and you have the cost of money potentially.
Yep.
And so all of those things, and I've said this in P&Z more than once, where, hey, well, we need affordable housing. It's like, we need to stop. And I think I actually got people to stop saying that. And actually, I was interviewing with the Dallas Morning News, and they asked this question yesterday, and it's something I'm very qualified to talk to. And they changed it, and they said, we need attainable housing. Okay, maybe we do. But I think, assuming we do, I would start with these things. First of all, we don't need any more apartments approved in this city.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need them. We have turned into, in my opinion, too much of a rental city. I think that homeownership is at the center of vibrant communities frequently. And so I don't think we need more apartments. And I voted against them more often than not on city council.
Mm-hmm.
So, on planning and zoning.
Mm-hmm.
So, with exceptions, there were places where I thought, gosh, this actually makes sense. So I think we're going to have to look at the types of housing that need to be built if we want to continue to offer housing. I would like to offer housing that's affordable for younger families, or attainable at least. I think that we should look at, and I've heard mixed feelings. I'm going to have to research this, but one of the things that happens is, let's say you're in a house and you want to downsize, and you talked about the tax freeze, which creates other pressures and all these things that most things are complex.
Yep.
And so one of the things is, older people are in their houses, their taxes are frozen, and they could downsize, but then they're going to get potentially a giant new tax.
Mm-hmm.
And so what that does is frees up our inventory of homes that might be better suited for families.
Yep.
And so I think we need to look at all that to say, what are those solutions, first of all? So if we could solve that, because there's a lot of people that want to downsize. Now, I was talking to somebody the other day, and they said, yeah, I downsized, and I don't have all the yard and everything to take care of. So I think still under the banner of a single family, we can do townhomes and other things, smaller footprints, smaller lot sizes potentially. And I think there are pieces of property around town that can accommodate that. And now let's talk about economic development. I think you make a case that we've had a very successful, robust economic development team in this town. You can make the case that we shouldn't do it. I get it. But Anyway, I would like, can we turn some of their attention onto working with developers who may be able to come in areas where we need to revitalize and possibly build some neighborhoods that have attainable housing. And so I just think we need to look at all of those things.
Hmm.
And the housing need here isn't so, right? I mean, I don't, this may sound bad, isn't all the people that want to move here so much. Although I would like to see more young families move here. And when you look at the enrollment in our public schools, now that's a whole other subject because a lot of the private schools are going up. So it's not just simply demographics, which people want to say it is. There's other things involved in the declining enrollment of our public schools, and we know what those things are to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
But we need places for people that Plano is their home and they want it to be their home. We need places for them to move, and we need to be thoughtful about that. And I think it's solvable, but it will require, some concerted effort to do that. Find companies that might be able to come in. When I was there, it was one of the helplines. We built kind of a curious little thing. I didn't build it. We approved it up on kind of the more the northeast side of town somewhat, where they put in some smaller homes, attached homes, in a unique piece of property that probably wasn't going to be used for much else. But those were attainable homes. And so I think there are creative things we can do. I don't know that we're going to be able to solve everybody's problem that wants to move to Plano, because this is a thriving place to be.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we can solve some of it. And I think the senior housing thing is an issue that if we can get some progress there, we solve some other problems.
Mm. And the only thing I had left was DART. I know that you have to go.
I'll answer DART for you. It's a biggie.
Okay. It's a what?
It's a big thing.
Oh, yeah. Yes. So I have to tell you that, we're putting millions of dollars into DART. And as you know, we're only getting maybe a fourth of it back in service. DART is sometimes slower than walking yourself. I know a gentleman that it would take him 30 minutes to walk from his house to work, and it would take him 30 minutes to use the bus. So would it be better to just give people vouchers for Lyfts and Ubers to get around the city and keep the buses and the trains going from Plano to Dallas?
I don't know. I mean, part of it gets to what is our responsibility as a city to provide transportation for everyone that needs it. I mean, so I don't know.
That's another, question of what's a core function. Is transportation a core function of a city government?
Well, I am a fan of having effective public transportation for people, and with a lot, our roads are crowded, and so if we could move people, but what we're doing, let's start with this. What we're doing now isn't working in any regard except for a very few people. There are very few riders on DART, and Plano is paying way too much, so the thing doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Here's my opinion. I was asked this yesterday. What about the rebates that they're going to give us versus legislation? Should Plano take the rebates? Should they fight for legislation? My opinion is this. I believe that DART hasn't been transparent enough with us so that we can even talk to them about working effectively.
Mm.
They have said that if in reducing this fees, this 25% we're demanding the sister cities around here, if they do that, they're going to have to reduce services. And so I was asked, do you believe that? What do you think about that? I go, I don't even know if it's true. So I don't know. So let's first of all start talking about working like partners, because we're funding this thing and we've got this egregious contract we got into. And so we need more transparency so that we can work together. I'm against legislation unless it's the last solution. I'm for trying to work with these guys, and I'm hopeful that maybe the efforts that we're putting in will help us work more synergistically together. But, I'm offended seeing buses roll around this town empty with my tax dollars.
Yeah.
It's bad in every regard. So we need to make progress in fixing that. Should we give everybody vouchers? You could probably do it. Is that the best idea? I don't know. But then if we can't, we are paying way too much, and it's not rational for the citizens of Plano, and we shouldn't be doing it. There is an option. We can pull the plug on the whole thing. And I think maybe we should even consider that. What is the long-term ramifications of that? I don't think it's the best idea, but maybe it is. And if we do that, okay, well, then you're going to end up paying for 10 years anyway. Okay, fine, but guess what? There's, there might be a cap on our taxes that we're giving these guys. I don't know if that's passed or not, but our taxes keep escalating. Our service doesn't get any better. We're at a dropping off point. We're at the end of the line. The police will tell you it's one of the biggest problems we have is that the stuff that's created out of DART has to be at the end of the line. People don't ride it because they don't feel necessarily secure. It's a giant mess. And it needs to get fixed one way or the other. And ultimately, maybe, I don't think this is the greatest idea at the moment, but it might be that we pull the lever and go, you know what? No, we'll pay for 10 years and we're backing out. And, and maybe there's other mitigation things. But this isn't working. We should stop doing things that aren't working. We are spending $300,000 a day, give or take, on DART. $300,000 a day.
Oh my gosh.
That's a fact.
Wow. I need to write that down.
I gave that number to one of the associations that was interviewing me, and the guy picked up his calculator. I go, you can do the math. I've already done it. He goes, you're right. I go, I know. $300,000 a day goes to DART.
Holy cow.
What could Plano do with some of those tax dollars?
Wow.
But most organizations become inefficient over time because we're humans.
Mm-hmm.
And you need a Doge-like effort sometimes to go in. And in my career, I've been involved. I was hired by a billion-dollar company to come in and help them as they emerged from bankruptcy. And we did. We went from losing several $100 million a year to making several $100 million in less than a year.
Well, you have shocked me on that number, $300,000 a day. Wow, what can we do with that money? That's amazing. I believe you. I'm just you could buy people houses with it. You could buy everyone a car.
We could buy almost 5 chicken coops a day. Imagine the chicken coops you're gonna have.
They'd be beautiful. Alrighty, I just want to thank you so much for joining us. This has been a great discussion. Thank you. I appreciate it. This is Esther for Plano's Political Pitbull.
May I say this for all
of
your
course.
listeners?
Yes.
I humbly ask for your vote. I promise to serve you to the best of my ability. I think I have a unique resume to do good things for Plano, and I hope all your listeners come out and support me and